as we interviewed Michael Frolickstein, if I remember how to say it correctly. Today we're going to be joining with Amy Keller, registered dietitian. And there we go. And we're going to join with her. Sorry, I'm like, again, my phone, I think like my fingers are. Anyway, so we will be joining with Amy Keller, registered dietitian, today and talking about how to navigate.
Yay, it worked. Woo! This is my first Instagram live ever.
It's my second, and yesterday was my first. So I mean, we're all learning.
I'm gonna turn up my volume on you a second here. Okay.
How are you? We're both wearing gray today.
I know. I said thank you for making me put on like regular clothes and do my hair.
Right. And I was like yesterday when I interviewed Michael, I wore a T-shirt from a Chicago bakery, and I'm like, I have nothing that says anything about Ohio.
Yeah.
Like I should change that, I'm a Michigan State fan, so you guys can trounce Michigan all you want.
That's right. Exactly. Well, yes, they're evil, so there you go.
My husband talks about like we root Michigan State, then Michigan, then probably like it's all about the Big Ten, like there's this progression of order of things. Right. So, and I was also going to give a shout out to a few Ohio businesses. My husband's giving me a pillow. Oh, we've got.
Oh no.
He made that in high school, right?
No, I
bought
it from a girl that I had a crush on.
No, he bought it from a girl he had a crush on.
Oh well.
I think in high school, and we still have middle school, and he still has it. So wild. But anyway, a few shout outs to Ohio businesses that I do know and love. So Cherbourg Bakery in Bexley, and they are doing free shipping nationwide.
Nice. And
then Bake Me Happy, also in Columbus. And then for those who are unaware, there's Rolling Mill Brewing. It's in
Middletown.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was
near Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's a dedicated gluten-free brewery.
Yeah.
So I've never been there, but I hear it's fantastic. So
no, my college roommates lives in Middletown. I've got to get down there to go try it.
Yeah, when we're allowed to go do things again.
Right, exactly.
For sure. So for those who are just joining us, this is Amy Keller. She's a registered dietitian, and you work for a hospital, correct?
I do. I work for a small hospital about an hour west of Columbus, which is exactly how everyone in the Midwest says everything. You pick the big city, and then you say how far you are away. I read that someplace, and that's exactly how it is. So about an hour west of Columbus, and I've been there.
Like Michigan, we point to our hand where we are. So,
yeah. I've been there about 17, 18 years now. But I've been doing the gluten-free thing with our celiac group for exactly 10 years. So 10 years ago this month was our first meeting. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to celebrate that the way I had wanted to.
Right.
But we'll do it virtually. And then we'll hopefully be able to meet up back again in August. We usually meet about 6 times a year. And then I just keep in touch with them via newsletters and things like that the rest of the year. Yeah.
Hi, Julie. And so there's quite a few of my followers chiming in. And Julie lives in Chicagoland. Tracy, I'm going to be interviewing her actually later this month. She works in the hospitality industry, but makes sure that people are accommodated when they go to like conferences and business meetings and food dietary restrictions. So as you and I talked privately, you yourself don't have celiac disease, but why is, you run your celiac disease support group. Why is celiac awareness so important to you?
It is so important because I really believe that food is power. And I think that's one of the reasons I got super interested in celiac disease is I sort of floundered around and being a dietitian for a number of years, not really figuring out what my passion was. And, after I had a patient that stayed with us, we used to have like a step down unit where people would stay for several weeks after a knee surgery or hip surgery. Right. And so this woman was with us for like 3 weeks. And I remember, I knew enough about celiac disease to sort of speak intelligently about it. But when she came to stay with us at the hospital for that length of time, it was a crash course for me. And I will say I'm not that old. But when I was in college, I was told if you didn't work in a children's hospital, you would never see this. So I learned about it, but I never really processed that because I was not going to work in pediatrics. Right. So I thought, well, I'll never need to use this. And in 2010, that changed for me in terms of getting educated. And what I like about celiac disease, and I know it's maybe what the rest of people don't like, is there is no medication for this.
Right. Yeah. We're not having to pay for pills or worry about side effects. Like it's just the diet.
Right. So food is your medicine. Food is power. And there really isn't a whole lot in dietetics that I can say that about.
Right.
You know, everything else has either a pharmacological component like diabetes, or, you know, a significant, you know, behavioral component like weight management. And that's what I like about celiac disease is I also see changes with patients that are so positive, that they've been sick for so long. And then we get going with this and they're on the gluten-free diet. And all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, that's how I'm supposed to feel.
Right.
So for a dietitian, it's incredibly gratifying, where sometimes my job isn't as gratifying as I would like it to be. But celiac disease does it because, you know, people feel better and their lives change, and that's awesome. That's awesome.
Right. Awesome. So, and I had talked to you like the thing, pardon me 1 second, I'm going to turn around. My fingers are like being dry and I want to wave back to people. And like, if I get my little pen that's got like a little rubber tip, I can like do things on my phone. So, as you and I talked beforehand, like what I wanted to kind of cover is like your top 5 tips, especially being a dietitian who works in a hospital, like dealing with health and giving tips. Like, and for background, for those of you who may not know, I met Amy. Nationwide Children's Hospital does a really great conference every year in the fall. And so I've heard Amy talk, I think twice now, maybe even 3 times. So that's where I know her and love what she does. And she's good friends with Trisha Thompson, who I adore. So that's why I'm so glad that Amy is with us. So I will stop talking and you can talk.
Okay. So yeah, and unfortunately I see a lot of bad experiences online, and maybe if you're on this, you know, this live video today, you've had one. And I always hope that nobody's had a bad experience in a hospital, but you know, all I have to do is get on social media and I know that's not true. So really, what can you do to, and because when you go to a hospital, in so many ways, you're not in control of anything. Right. One of the things that's kind of stinks about hospitals is everybody's controlling your schedule and your meals and just even your whole day is planned out. And especially now where you can't have visitors and all of those unfortunate things that are going on. So I think the first thing is I talk about planning ahead. If you, and there's situations where you can plan ahead. Obviously COVID's not one of them. But if you can plan ahead, for example, if you know you're going to have a surgery, let's say when electives open up again, and you know you're going to have a knee replacement or a hip replacement, start thinking ahead now about what you're going to do. So planning ahead, okay, I'm going to contact the hospital and I'm going to let them know that I need to be on the gluten-free diet. I'm going to work with my physician. And I have to say, that's how I got into this. It was actually a physician who contacted me about this particular patient who was going to be with us for this lengthy period of time. And said, you need to talk to her. She's on this really special diet. I think he actually said she's on this really weird diet. Because he didn't know what he was talking about either. Right. And he's like, you need to come talk to her. So this is the thing that you want to do, is start to think ahead, especially like I said, if you have a planned admission. So start making a list of, you know, what you're going to take with you. And we'll talk a little bit about what's appropriate to take and maybe what's not so appropriate to take to the hospital with you. Just like you would pack your clothes, thinking about maybe having some things available that you enjoy. So for those planned surgeries, it's pretty easy. But you do want to find out, again, we'll talk about who those key players are, but find out how meals are served. Is it room service? Most hospitals have gone to that model of calling in your order, having a menu that's set. Find out, is it a special gluten-free menu I need to be asking for? Do they modify, like we do the regular hospital menu to fit gluten-free, and then we have a supplementary menu. So find out what that process is in the hospital that you're going to.
My dad had been in Sparrow Hospital in Lansing multiple times, and they had a 4-page specialty gluten-free menu. And yep, he would have to call his order, and it was funny. Like he would sometimes, if he was getting discharged, like the food so much, he's like, oh no, I can't leave yet. Like my dinner's coming.
Yeah.
So you know, they did a great job. So
you know, it used to be, if you've been in the hospitals, you know, maybe more than 10 years ago, you used to mark your menu for the day ahead, which I never made sense to me, because I'm like, I don't know what I want tomorrow.
Right.
I think,
especially if you're in the hospital, you're sick, and you're like, I don't know if I'm even going to want to eat. I mean, obviously we need to eat together, but you're like, you know.
Right. And, you know, the interesting thing about it is that you might, you know, you might have marked that menu, and then again, your diet changed from a liquid diet to a solid food diet. Right. So most hospitals have gotten away from that model because it wasn't particularly patient friendly, and we're all about serving customer now. That's a real focus in hospitals because we get graded on that as hospitals. Right. So room service really fits into that model really, really well. But you might have room service where you're responsible for making a phone call. You might have room service like we do, where they can actually come to your room and take your order. But find out what that system is. So that's your planning ahead. Thinking ahead when you can't plan ahead, and this is where we are, I think, now. If for some horrible reason you end up hospitalized with COVID, or anything that
right.
most admissions,
yeah,
right, many admissions are not planned.
Right.
So this is a tip I actually stole from a family member, but I really like it, and I think it applies really well to this situation. Have a folder together or an envelope, like a brown paper envelope, by your front door, or with a family member. Have 2 copies, maybe one with a family member, one at your front door, that the ambulance could take with them, that explains not only your medications and those types of things that you're on maybe for other conditions, but explains that you have celiac disease and you must avoid gluten. And here's how I do that.
Right.
You know, so they can share that with information with the emergency room when they drop you off. You know, or something that you can grab on the way out the door. What I like about that is it allows you to speak when you can't speak. And, you know, it may be a case where you're in isolation, as all of these poor COVID patients end up. It may be a case where you had a stroke and are not able to speak for yourself. It may just be you're really, really sick, and you just can't really get that out, that I need to avoid gluten. And if they're bringing saltines to your bedside, that's not a helpful thing.
No.
So you want to make sure that you are, you know, have that information available. So that can be like in written form. Some people have it like on an emergency necklace. That's another place to put it. But sometimes just like hand it, and the squad can just grab that, you know, folder. It says, the reason my family member had it said, for the squad. Like they knew they were older, and they knew that they could end up being picked up, and they wanted that communicated to the squad that was picking them up.
And I remember you speaking about this at the conference at Nationwide Children's, and I was like, my mind was blown. I'm like, why didn't I think of something like that? But it really is so powerful. And Tracy's agreeing that, again, like planning ahead is so important. It's such great information. So thank you, Amy.
You're welcome. So planning ahead, thinking ahead, and then knowing those key players. Hopefully dietitians are up on this. They should be. I used to give people kind of a grace period, but now I'm like, hey, we're kind of 10 years into this, you know, of this being really a prevalent condition in terms of the recognition of it. Now, come on, we need to catch up. But I will say I was that uneducated dietitian prior to 2010. So, you know, ideally you're hoping that you can talk to a dietitian that has some experience in this. But you want to make sure that you know those key players. That would be your dietitian, and that would be your food service director. The person that comes to your room to take your order may or may not be super up on it. So I would recommend that when you're admitted to the hospital, again, before you go to the hospital, if you have a planned admission, but when you get to the hospital, if you have an unplanned admission, to ask to speak to the dietitian or the food service director as soon as possible. Now, if this is in the middle of the night, I'm not coming in. I'm just going to tell you right now. I'll be there after breakfast. You know, so we serve breakfast pretty early. But I will see you, no later than mid-morning the next day. If it's on the weekend, the diet office will call me at home, and I'll be happy to make a trip in to talk to you about what our situation is. So if I'm not available, or if the dietitian is not available, ask to speak to that food service director. Again, they're well educated. Some hospitals, even have the luxury of having a chef.
Right.
So ask to speak to the chef, just like you would in a restaurant.
I was just gonna say that, like you talking about the food service director. I'm like, it's kind of like when we, go to the restaurant and want to ask the chef, and the same rules apply. Like I tell people, like, before you go to a restaurant is the time to call and ask, what are your procedures? Not, walk in and be like, how. And I always tell people too, like 2 and 3 p.m. is the slow time in a restaurant. Like, try to think of when the busy time is at a hospital. Hospitals are always busy, yes, but like, don't do it when doctors are doing morning rounds, like do later in the day. And you kind of think about when you're calling the hospital to ask these questions and kind of what their schedule is like.
If you have like pre-admission testing, actually, that's where I met my patient 10 years ago, was in pre-admission testing. And she came with this sort of written list. And again, it was a crash course education with her. Ask at pre-admission testing, say, I'm going to be coming in for my pre-admission testing, having my physical or whatever. Can I speak to the dietitian at that time? You can either ask the surgeon that's caring for you, like I was asked, or speak with pre-admission testing and say, hey, this is what I want to do. But if you're not having a planned admission, again, it may be a couple hours or a few hours, but they will get to you. And then you want to talk about what procedures are in place. So I hear a lot on social media that if they did have gluten-free items available, I don't know about cross-contact in the kitchen. And so that's where the dietitian or the chef or the food service director can be really helpful, because they should be able to explain, here are the things that we do to prevent cross contact in the kitchen. So it's really important that you ask. And I had a patient once, and I just remember this very clearly. She was one of our younger, healthier patients, but she was refusing to eat meals until she had met with me.
Right.
Because she just wasn't sure.
Right.
And once I met her, we kind of went over, here are the, 5 or 10 things that we do. She was like, oh, okay, I feel much better. So don't, we'll get to this at the end, but don't be afraid to speak up and say, I need to talk to somebody. Or if something does, unfortunately, mistakes happen, as much as I would like to say they never do, they do. Where something ends up on your tray that should not be on your tray, it's time to speak up and say, hey, that's not cool. Instead of keeping that all inside or posting it about it on social media, how you had this horrible experience, ask to speak to somebody, because we can remedy the situation much more quickly if we know about it. And that's the other thing. Tell us, I want to know if something has been messed up. I have a post
on my website about what do you do when the restaurant messes up? And I'm like, well, don't just scream at them on social media if you didn't take the time to talk to them, because and it's important how we do this and the tone we use. And it's probably tougher because if you're in the hospital, you don't want to be there unless you're having a baby. But, try to be as kind as possible, because then it's a learning end for the hospital as well. And the tone we take really defines what message we get across.
Right. I want to take corrective action right then.
Right.
I want to know if there was a staff member issue. I want to know, who do I need to go talk to?
Right.
And if I learn about it later on social media, well, that doesn't help me. Or if I learn about it through customer service, that doesn't help me, because it's hard for me to trace back.
Right.
What staff member maybe needs a little bit more education, rather than, if I can just fix it right then, I'd rather do it.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the way to handle it. And then looking about not just food, and it's, we'll get a little bit into dietary supplements here, but medications are a big thing that you're going to take in the hospital. So you want to make sure that all players in the hospital are aware of your gluten-free restrictions. So that only includes nursing. And I say nursing, not necessarily because they're going to be feeding you, but sometimes they grab you a snack out of the pantry.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you're not, again, you don't wake up to graham crackers at your bedside. Or saltines at your bedside. You want to make sure that they're aware. So that's, nursing is important to inform as well. And then pharmacy.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I recommend is that you have gluten containing things placed on your allergy list. So, I can put in a gluten-free diet order, or the provider can put in a gluten-free diet order, but it also helps to have wheat, rye, barley, and I would just put oats generally in your allergy list, because most of the time, again, unless I'm serving you oats and I know that where they came from, they're not going to be safe. So you want to put that in your allergy list as well, so that can be referred to in your medications.
That's so great.
If you're not sure about your medications, you know, if you know you're going to be put on an antibiotic after the surgery, again, doing a little research ahead of time, gluten-free drugs is still my go-to. For information, although there are still, I think, other resources out there. Gluten-free drugs is still my go-to for information. Remember, gluten has to be ingested. So if it's a cream they're going to be putting on your skin after the surgery, that's not an issue. You know, injections are not an issue. So you have to ingest it, you have to eat it to make it to be a problem. And again, that's where sometimes pills can be an issue. And I always remember Dr. Plogstad say, it's a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal, because it doesn't happen very often, that gluten medications.
I will say,
be aware.
I will say it was interesting when my dad was recently hospitalized and on a trach, on a ventilator, and getting like nutrition. Like, I made sure to ask the nurses, like, please tell him, because again, he couldn't speak for himself. And you know, he had celiac disease as well. And I was saying, do you know if the liquid nutrition you plan to give him is gluten-free? And they're all like, oh, we don't know that answer. And then they got back to me and they said they checked it. And I said, I'm sorry for asking so. I'm like, no, like, thank you. She's like, we just learned something that now I can take on to future patients. You know, so yeah.
It's a great thing to bring up. And speaking of liquid nutrition, I can't think of a single tube feeding that contains gluten.
Yeah, I can't either. But it was just, you know, when you're, especially in my dad's situation where everything is just so traumatic, you're just like, you know, and you rely back on got to make sure everything's gluten-free, and you just check that off first. That's the one thing you know to ask.
So, you know, that's a great point. If, you know, unfortunately, we're ending up with COVID patients on ventilators, and when you're put on a ventilator, we have to feed you somehow. And tube feeding is the way we end up having to feed you. And they are always gluten, and they are, I can't even think of one that contains lactose. So if gluten and lactose are an issue for you, not a concern. Same thing with those oral nutrition supplements like Ensure or Boost. Those are always gluten-free. They are always lactose-free. Now, they have milk protein in them. So if you're allergic to milk, like true allergy, that's a different story. But if you are a lactose intolerance patient, that goes along with often with gluten-free, this is not a concern. Even though they look like milk, doesn't mean that that has lactose in it. The only one that I can think is an exception, and sometimes we use it in the hospital, is Carnation Instant Breakfast. It's a cheaper alternative to supplements, and I don't use it as much in the hospital, but sometimes for homegoing for patients, that contains both gluten and lactose. So we don't use that for our gluten-free patients. But
I don't think I knew about Carnation having gluten, so I just learned something from you. Thank you.
I think I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if the liquid's included, but like the powders, we don't consider gluten-free. So yeah, go ahead and, you know, ask about those supplements. And that's another thing. If you find that food's running a little short for you in the hospital, you know, asking about, you know, can I have a Boost or an Ensure to just make sure I'm getting enough calories and protein. And frankly, when you're in the hospital, you don't feel like eating much anyway. And so, you know, I always think if you're sick enough to be there, it's rare that patients eat all of their food. Again, unless they're having a baby or something like that, that's more of a happy occasion. Ensure and Boost are go-to staples for me in the hospital in terms of, you know, patients are not maybe eating less than 50% of their meals, and I know they need more calories, so I'll often prescribe a Boost or an Ensure to get them just those extra calories. They don't have to stay on it forever. You know, usually a few days, and that'll eventually, you know, you'll be able to come off of that. But, you know, for some patients, they continue at home as well. So finally, be patient, but speak up. And I kind of referred to this a little bit already. You may find you get sort of plain meals those first couple of days, especially if you get into a hospital that doesn't have a great gluten-free supply of food. Now, I take great pride in our hospital having kind of a kick butt supply of food because I make sure of it. You know, I try to have those things that I think patients would enjoy and that I've had experience with patients enjoying. So we always make sure we have like gluten-free mac and cheese, super popular. That's a comfort food. You know, I always want to make sure I have enough soups. You know, we serve regular Campbell's to regular patients, you know, but for my gluten-free patients, I make sure I have Pacific Natural, or I make sure I have Progresso and flavors that people like. So, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, if you end up in a situation, and this is maybe a word of advice to dietitians too, make sure you have a reasonable supply of things. It doesn't have to be days and days of stuff, but, you know, we keep 5 or 6 Annie's mac and cheeses around for gluten-free patients. So, you know, and then I can replenish them as they get used. So if you get into a situation though, where it's not the greatest supply, they don't have gluten-free bread, they don't have gluten-free rolls, maybe they don't have a gluten-free soup, you're going to end up with kind of plain meals those first few days. And hopefully, especially if you're going to stay a few days, you can say, hey, maybe I want to have a few things around. And, you know, and this is something where you can plan ahead too. If you have a particular favorite cereal, you know, that's something that's shelf stable and can sit in your room. If you bring in, you know, a particular microwave dinner, that gets a little trickier because then it has to be stored on the nursing unit. It can be done, you know, and you'll want to ask about that. And this is something when you plan ahead for those procedures, ask, you know, if I brought some gluten-free crackers, my favorite cereal, is that okay? And, you know, again, because they're shelf stable, it should be. Even if I was your dietitian, I'd be like, oh, that's totally fine. I mean, I would probably offer to buy it for you first. But if you said, no, I'll just bring it, that's fine too. But, you know, you might get those plain meals. So you might get a chicken breast and a baked potato and green beans, you know, still a meal.
But it's the calories and the protein your body needs to heal. So.
You know, they ideally should not be serving you salads every meal as the only option. You know, they should not be serving you only eggs, you know.
Although I love me some eggs. I'd probably be okay.
You know, so if you think about, let's say you're thinking about a breakfast, you know, breakfast items that are naturally gluten-free, you know, saying, okay, do you have cream of rice around? Could I have cream of rice? You know, okay, cream of rice with my scrambled eggs, or can you make it into an omelet, you know, and then maybe, you know, a side of fruit cup. Again, that's a very balanced meal that has no specialty gluten-free products in it.
Exactly.
But again, if they happen to have gluten-free buns and you can order, you know, a hamburger on a gluten-free bun, awesome. You know, you still, again, want to ask those questions about cross-contact. You know, I always say that I'd rather have the patient tell me a little bit about what they expect, and then I can go, here's what we do. And usually we can meet someplace in the middle. You know, yes, we can use a clean pan when we make your eggs. In fact, that's what we do for our gluten-free patients. Yes, we use a piece of foil on the grill, so everything is separated and cooked in a different way. So again, you know, yes, we have a separate toaster, you know, in our kitchen that we reserve only for our gluten-free patients. We actually have an allergy kit that we bought that is has separate utensils in it.
So the purple handle stuff?
Yep.
I've seen those. Western Michigan University uses those in their kitchen.
So we get the purple kit out when it's time to make gluten-free foods. So again, you know, you want to mention those things, but you, again, you know, the dietitian should be able to explain those, or the food service director, the chef should be able to explain those as well. But be patient. You know, if you get a plain breakfast that next morning from your admission, and maybe a kind of a plain lunch, you know, hey, you know, can I meet with the dietitian? Hey, it would be really great if I could get some cereal in, you know, what would you like to have? And again, most dietitians are going to be able to help you out with that. Go ahead.
I'm really glad you said that, because I have this follower on Facebook. I don't think she's on Instagram. And she's like, you need to contact such and such hospital. They should have given me better food than what I had. I'm thinking, but you could have talked to them. And I personally cannot talk to every hospital in the state of Michigan unless they have some conference. Then I'd be happy to show up. But, you know, and each kitchen obviously is going to have different. I'm like you have the allergy kit, but maybe not every hospital does. And again, the goal is to get you healthy enough to leave the hospital. So yes, it'd be great if we had char buns or Annie's mac and cheese. But the goal is, how can we feed you safely so you don't get sick from gluten on top of the reason of being in the hospital?
And again, we'd much rather correct it early than to wait. And I feel strongly too, again, calories are calories, you know, so if you find that you're, you know, having a little trouble getting your protein in, you know, ask for that Ensure boost to give you those extra calories that you need. So I think there's lots of options. And I think, you know, sometimes in a bigger hospital, you might feel like, okay, you know, who do I even ask for? Is it the dietitian? You know, my son's leaving the house. Who do I ask for? Again, I think you want to ask, you know, ask nursing, okay, who is the registered dietitian that covers this floor? You know, and can I speak with them, you know, if you're in a bigger facility? And again, it might just take a little time for them to get to you, but they will get to you.
Right. Thank you so much. And so for those who are still maybe just chimed in or still watching, can you just go over again, like who you are and where you work and what your experience is?
My name is Amy Keller. I'm a dietitian in a small hospital about an hour west of Columbus. Hope you never have to visit me because, you know, nobody wants to be there, especially right now.
Right.
But, you know, it's really important to kind of plan ahead, and in the absence of planning ahead, thinking ahead of how you want to handle hospital admissions. No one wants to be there, but you want to make sure that you know, again, think about, you know, what you need to do, who you need to talk to. Again, having that emergency packet. I saw somebody said, that's such a great idea. Yeah, having that emergency packet is a really good way to speak for you if you can't speak for you. And again, also talking to family members and making sure that they understand, you know, right now, unfortunately, family members can't accompany patients into the hospital like they used to. I'm hoping that will eventually revert back so people can have visitors, because I know how important that is. But, you know, if it's, you know, you're going in and making sure your spouse knows that, you know, they want to make sure that you're having gluten-free items again, so they can help speak for you as well when we get back to having those folks in the hospital with us. And then again, get to know those key players. It's not just food, so check those meds and have the pharmacist be aware by putting that information in the allergy section of your chart. And then speak up now. Right. Don't wait. Like you said, it's hard to correct a problem if you don't know when it happened, you know. And the other thing to remember is that hospitals have come a long way. Sometimes I read on social media, well, I had a baby 12 years ago and they were horrible at it. Yeah, they probably were. We were probably horrible at it too. You know, so yeah, things have changed, and many dietitians are much more up on this. Many hospitals have adapted menus or have a separate gluten-free menu, had the good experiences that you've had, you know, in the hospital. So give us a chance. Right. You know, if it was 12 years ago, I can almost guarantee you things are better than they were. Obviously, you know, we also have a long way to come. But, you know, it's just, you know, if it's been a long time, things may be much improved for you. Right.
Now, you also have a podcast. Can you just tell us real quick a little bit about your podcast and what you talk about, what topics?
Yeah. So you're actually hearing from me from the Secret Life of Dietitians Instagram account today. This is a podcast that a dietitian who lives in Columbus and I started about, a little over a year ago. We take on different topics every week, but we did actually have a separate Is Gluten Bad for Me podcast, and that's definitely more at the general public. Although I talk about why it's important that people who need to be gluten-free are gluten-free. So you might enjoy that. I'll include a link. I'll send that to you.
Okay, great.
It's not been in our recent podcast list because it's been a little while since I've done that one. But we take on things like the DASH diet. We take on things like organic. We take on things like dietary supplements. We've done stuff actually on COVID. So we've actually kind of covered a lot of topics, and we usually release a podcast once every 2 weeks. I like to think that Laura Poland, who's my co-worker or my co-dietitian on this podcast, and I are like a dish of common sense. Yes. So it's not just, you know, high-end nutrition or, you know, don't eat these things. We like to think that we're very much a dish of common sense, along with, you know, getting you some good information maybe about what's true and what's not true. And we actually do whole things on busting myths about nutrition. And we take listener suggestions. So if you listen to a few podcasts, you're like, oh, that's great, but maybe you guys could cover this. Send us an email. There's a link on our website, and again, I'll include this to you. You can again send us an email at any time. We love listener suggestions. We've done many shows based on listener suggestions.
And I actually have a friend, a fellow influencer who is a registered dietitian in Texas. I think she might be a fun person for you to talk to. I'll have to connect the two of you.
Awesome.
She has type 1 diabetes. And it's an interesting story. Is her husband has celiac, but because she knew about celiac disease from her dietetic work, like she's the one that helped him get tested.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. And I love, and she's very down to earth like you are too. Like I love looking at your Instagram feed. And I think so many of the things that you posted, Mary Ellen would be like, oh yeah, yep, I agree with that and that and that. And like, yeah, eat the donut, life is short. Like we can't always be perfect. And yeah.
Nutrition is hard enough. Life's hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, I've been reading about the quarantine 15 and I think that's just crap. You know,
I saw that Instagram post. I was like, think about these 15 things instead or whatever. It was like, that's so funny.
15 minutes of meditation, 15 minutes of yoga, 15 minutes of taking a walk instead of worrying about pounds on the scale. This is not the time to be worried. This is not
normal life. Like we need to give ourselves a lot of grace right now.
Absolutely.
A lot of grace.
Yeah, it's a tough time now for everyone. You know, yes, we all might be eating more or maybe drinking more than we should be. But it's really important to give yourself some grace and then think about other ways that are maybe healthier to self-care. So, you know, again, exercise, quiet, avoiding the news media, you know, as much as, you know, if you get your dose of news for 15 minutes, but then move on for the day. Don't go down a rabbit hole, you know, because it's really easy to do, especially on social media.
So does anybody have any quick questions for Amy or myself? I see a few people just joined Drink Bloom. They're a meadery out of Ann Arbor. They're such cool people. Like all of their snacks and foods are gluten-free. So they're right downtown where everything's happening in Ann Arbor. They're great people. But yeah, I think I just really appreciate you, Amy, and all that you do, and I always enjoy your conference presentations. Are always really great and down to earth and really informative. And if anybody is, and I tell people all the time, even if you don't live in Ohio and even if you don't have kids, because technically that conference is generally geared towards parents of children. But I still think, you know, it's great to hear new speakers, and even if you're just going for yourself and you learn new stuff. And Columbus is great. Like we have Bear Burger and other great restaurants we don't have here in Michigan.
Yeah, Columbus really has a nice handle on the gluten-free scene. You know, between the Cameron Mitchell restaurants, you know, Cat City Diner and those types of things, where I've taken, you know, colleague dietitians who've been in town there who are gluten-free and have never worried about them getting served. I've still
never been to Cat City. I don't know how
you've got to go.
It's because I love Bear Burger so much, and I'm like, I gotta go. Right. I need to go to Cat City.
Right. You want to, again, look for those places with those dedicated fryers. You know, I think that's where we get the advantage of things like Bear Burger. They know what they're doing there. You know?
We need one in Michigan. Really, it would do so well in Ann Arbor. I think it would do great in Ann Arbor.
That seems like an Ann Arbor kind of thing.
Yeah,
like a college town?
Yeah, big college town. And lots of people who like to, I mean, especially because like I don't think they still have it on the menu, but like the first time I met Erica from Celiac and the Beast was at when they did the Living Without tour. The show, which is unfortunately no more. But like she and I went out to lunch, out to dinner, and like they had duck bacon, and I was like, it just blew my mind. And actually, it's funny because I was so excited about meeting her that I accidentally locked my keys in the car, and like so she had no car, so I was driving her. So like here's my car parked in the Short North parking lot. And it's raining. So like luckily we're in Bear Burger and AAA comes. I'm like, oh my gosh, like how embarrassing. Like the first time that you meet someone you're so excited to meet, and then you're like, oh man, I feel stupid.
So all the time.
I have her book, and that she signed inside, "We'll always have Bear Burger," and I'm like, oh, so funny. I'll have her on at the end of the month too to talk about like IBS and some of the other stuff that she's dealt with, because you know, it's not. Yes, we have celiac disease, but when we feel sick, it's not always celiac that's causing the issues. I mean, to be mindful of that as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah, gluten is unfortunately I hate to say it's not a scapegoat, because it can be the problem. And that's the other thing to remember. If you're in the hospital and you're not feeling well, there's a lot of stuff they're doing to you in the hospital that may not make you feel well. You know,
exactly.
You may be getting medications, then you may be getting medications that make you sick to your stomach or give you diarrhea. That's not gluten. You know, don't think right to your tray. You know, that's another thing. I guess that's another thing to think about in your plan ahead packet, writing just a very brief description of what gluten does to you.
Oh, that's a good point.
If gluten makes you throw up, write that down. You know, if gluten gives you diarrhea, that helps the doctors to know too.
Right.
Is it gluten? Is it something else? So if your getting gluten symptom is severe diarrhea, but you're throwing up, then it's probably not gluten. You know, it's probably something else that's going on. Again, there's so many rough medications that people get when they're in the hospital that can make them quite sick. You know, and so that's something to, you know, if you can kind of give people a clue of here's my glutenized symptoms or gluten symptoms, here's stuff that doesn't happen to me. You know,
that's really good.
Maybe that's maybe something that, you know, would be helpful to provide to your provider or to your dietitian as well.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today and all of your information. I think this is, again, we talk about with seeing social media, people like, oh, I had this terrible experience. And every time I think of you and I'm like, you need to hear what Amy has to say, because then it'll help prepare you and then you won't have this problem anymore. And I think, you know, hospitals could hear what you have to say too. But I think, you know, as much as we can be in control of our own health, the better. And so I always think of you every single time I think about people being in the hospital. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I truly appreciate it.
Anytime. If I send you those links, is there a way you can pass those on?
Yeah, so my plan is, if I do this right today, I messed up yesterday, but I can theoretically download this Instagram Live to my phone and then upload it to YouTube. And then I can put those links in YouTube. Awesome. So the Roundup with Michael yesterday is on YouTube now. So if I save it correctly yesterday I messed up and it was a headache. But
we'll get there.
And if all else fails, you can send those links to me, and I have I can put them on Facebook and share those as well. I have a lot of readers there that aren't here. They don't do both platforms. So thank you so much.
Anytime.
Stay safe, and thank you as a frontline worker for all that you're doing right now to take care of regular patients and COVID patients, and it's just thank you. I appreciate it.
It's been a weird time. I'm not going to say it's been a very weird time. So hoping that things can stay relatively calm. Ohio's been good with squashing that curve.
Yeah.
We can continue to do it. So,
yeah.
All right. You have a good day. Thank you.
You too, my dear. Bye.
Bye.